Hello and welcome to Every Vote Counts. I'm Amy Walter, host of Politics with Amy Walter on The Takeaway. This is the second in our series of Every Vote Counts. We know that the coronavirus pandemic has changed basically every facet of our life, including some of the most basic things that we do, like how we choose to cast a ballot. And we also know that lots of people want to have choices for how they cast a ballot. If you look at what happened in the primaries after the COVID pandemic hit, we saw a record number of voters choosing to vote by mail or absentee. There's obviously still much concern out there by many about voting in person, given the health pandemic, and people are looking for any available choice. Plus, they want to be sure that if they do go vote in person, that it's going to be safe. Of course, put into the mix of all of this confusion is disinformation out there about how this process works. Obviously, every state has different rules. It is important for all voters to understand the rules of their individual state. But what we are trying to do here is to focus on a handful of states that we know are going to be very important in the presidential election. Some also have very high-profile statewide races. And these are states that are going to get a lot of national attention. So we want to focus on them and to help voters understand the rules and to make sure that, well, their vote actually will count, no matter how they cast that ballot. Today, we are looking at Arizona. Arizona is a top battleground state, and it is a state that not that long ago wasn't put into the pantheon of swing states. Since 1952, it has only voted for a Democrat for president one time, but polls now show that Joe Biden is definitely in the hunt in this state, many showing him ahead by a small margin. And it's a state that in 2018 elected a Democratic senator and also elected a Democrat as Secretary of State. And that's who I want to introduce right now. Katie Hobbs is the Secretary of State in Arizona. Thank you so much for coming on and helping us with Every Vote Counts. I appreciate it. Yep, we just got to do, there we go. It's the classic, you're either muted or you're not muted. It's life in the Zoom world is challenging. Yeah. Well, let's just start with the basics here. Can you tell us, what is your job? What does the Secretary of State actually do?
Well, among other things, I'm the Chief Election Officer for the state of Arizona. And so what that means is we oversee elections. We ensure that federal voting laws are complied with across the state. We do that with an election procedures manual. We also oversee election security. We administer the statewide voter registration database. We conduct logic and accuracy testing on voting equipment prior to every election. We are also the filing office for federal, state, and federal and state elections, so the candidates running for those offices, and we're the filing office for ballot initiatives. And so that is all very involved in terms of processing all of that. That's all of our work related.
That's a lot.
We certify the official results, which is kind of important too. So
yeah, so basically anything that's involved with an election goes through your office.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about how the process of voting has changed in this time of COVID-19. What kind of precautions and other measures have you taken?
Well, first, I want to say I feel very fortunate to be in the position. You talked about voters having options, and Arizona has long been a state where voters have options in how they vote. And in the 2018 election, 78% of our voters voted early through either in-person early voting or by mail, but most of that's by mail. And so we have that fortunate position that most voters already take advantage of that option, knowing that voting by mail is probably the safest way to vote in this election. So we have really ramped up focusing on those voters that aren't already signed up for our permanent early voting list, getting them on there, providing as much information as we can for how they do that. We worked with the counties to get a mailer to every non-permanent early voter on how they can apply for that list and be on that list, or to receive a one-time early ballot. But then we're also focused on expanding in-person early voting options, particularly in areas where voting by mail is more challenging. So expanding the early voting locations, as well as the secure ballot drop boxes where voters can drop their ballots if they don't have access to the mail, or if they're returning it late, and so the mail isn't an option. And then also, in terms of in-person voting, focused on all of the health precautions that need to be in place, supporting counties in recruiting enough poll workers, making sure that they have the masks and gloves and things like that that are needed for poll workers and voters, as well as helping to secure larger facilities so that voting can be more spaced out.
So you pointed out that almost 80% of voters voted by mail in the last election. And I read somewhere that about 75% of registered voters in the state are already permanent absentee voters, meaning they automatically get a ballot in the mail, right? So it's already likely to be when you think about voting, many states have 75% of their voters coming into polls. Mm-hmm. Your expectation will be what? Because this is going to be likely a very high turnout, do you expect perhaps more people showing up at the polls this year because they have only now just registered?
We do expect increased turnout. We saw record turnout in our presidential preference election in March, record turnout in the primary that we just had in August. But we also saw a great increase in early voters in that election. That election the primary saw 88% of voters voting early. Wow. When voters register in Arizona, there is a box right there on the registration form, or right there on the website if they're registering online, to sign up for that permanent early voting list. And so voters are getting that message really early on in the process.
Let's talk a little bit about what some folks are saying about vote by mail, and get your response to this. The Attorney General was in the state a little while ago, Bill Barr, and he said that the vote by mail is a problem because it eliminates protections of secret ballots. He said, your name is associated with a particular ballot. The government and people involved can find out how you voted, and it opens the door to coercion. Can you respond to that?
Yeah, that is just absolutely not true. And I think just the Attorney General's comments in general either indicate that he doesn't understand how the system works, or he's deliberately misleading the American people about how the system works. But one of the first thing that happens when the county recorders receive your ballot back in the mail is they have that affidavit on the envelope, and they have to verify your signature that's how they verify the voter's identity. As soon as that happens, that ballot is separated from that envelope, and it can never be tied back to that voter again. Those ballots go into the process ready to be tabulated. And there's no way for any election official to go back into that pile of ballots and find somebody's specific ballot. So that's just absolutely not the case. And there are also protections around ensuring that the folks who are doing that signature verification process are not also looking at the ballots to, whatever. That just is, there are protections around that.
And so when you hear the Attorney General saying this, of course, the president has also argued that vote by mail is full of potential fraud and that the election could be stolen from him based on the results of these ballots that are sent in absentee. Tell me what you think this says to voters and what it says about the process. And do you think that it's potentially turning off voters from participating in voting?
Well, the fact is that that is just disinformation about the process. And so disinformation is already a challenge that election officials across the country have to face. And so this is another layer of that. But I think in Arizona, we've been successful. We saw a record turnout in our primary, which was in August. So after a lot of this conversation has been already happening nationally, we saw record turnout and record early vote by mail turnout. So I think we're successfully overcoming that message. Voters in Arizona have put their confidence in vote by mail for a long time, and they're continuing to do so.
And you've had vote by mail there for more than 20 years, right?
Yes, it was no excuse absentee ballot was authorized in 1996.
Let's talk about counting those ballots in Arizona. It is in the last election. Some of us remember quite well waiting for it. It felt like a long time. It was something close to 2 weeks for the final outcome of your race and for the Senate race, for all the ballots to be counted. It was funny, when I was researching this, I also went back and was reading stories from as far back as 2012, where they were still counting votes 2 weeks after Election Day. So what is your expectation for what the tallying will look like on Election Day?
Well, I first want to say it's important for folks to note that the election isn't over when the polls close at 7 p.m. on Election Day. That there's a lot that goes on after that, including tabulating the ballots. So, the first other thing I will say is we don't know how many people are going to drop off early ballots on Election Day. And so one of the things that contributes to longer tabulation times is processing those early ballots, because those still have to be signature verified. In Arizona, we can start doing that immediately. So as soon as early voting starts and early ballots start coming back in, the counties are already processing those. We can start tabulating 14 days before the election. That is not the case in a lot of other states that are starting early voting to larger degrees this year. So I think that Arizona won't be the last one counting. And I think what we want to assure voters is everyone who has cast a valid ballot is going to have that ballot counted. We're focused on getting it right, and that doesn't always mean fast. And election results are never final on election night. There's always votes left to be tabulated. So I think that it's important to normalize that and not think that there's anything going on wrong if election results are not final on election night. That there's still a lot of ballots to be processed.
Yeah, and that's a question I've been asking a lot of election officials, is sort of the transparency in the process. So as a voter there, how confident should I feel about putting something in a drop box, knowing that it's definitely getting to you? How will I know that you, not you personally, but that the election office has gotten it, has tabulated that vote, and I should feel confident that it's sitting there and is secure?
So every early voter, every voter who has a mail-in ballot is able to track their ballot when it gets back to the county. And so if you drop your ballot in a drop box on a Monday morning, by Monday afternoon, that ballot should be in the hands of the county, and you should be able to check and verify at least by the next day that they have it. In Maricopa County, which is obviously one of the largest voting jurisdictions in the country, you can actually opt into a text message option where it will actually send you a text message when your ballot's received. And so it takes all of the checking off of you, and you'll automatically get that notification. And then, so it's a very secure process. And there's a lot of regulations both in statute and in the election procedures manual of how those early ballots are secured and transported from the ballot drop box back to the headquarters to ensure security around all of that.
So your point is, look, if you vote early, like if you're voting in early October, your ballot is already being tabulated. But if it's the day of the election and you go in and you drop off your ballot in a drop box, that's okay. You can do that. But it's going to take a lot longer then to process all of those last minute ballots.
It doesn't necessarily take longer. There are a lot of folks working on that from election day until the end of the period of time where counties have to certify their results. You will get immediate no. It just might add to the time that it takes to tabulate all of the final votes.
Well, in looking back at your race, for example, this is what I'm wondering about your concern about, as you said, this is normal. It takes a while to count votes. You want to get it right. But in many cases, news organizations want to call these races and say, so-and-so has won the Senate race. This candidate has won at this level. And that the Associated Press called your race for the Republican. And it wasn't until a couple weeks later that it was clear that, well, that person didn't win and you did. So how worried are you that there's going to be some jumping of the gun by news organizations? And then that sets the tone, right? People are going to say, well, wait a minute. If AP said that this person won, how can you come back and say that's not true?
Yeah, that is a concern. And when we're talking to reporters, we're asking them to refrain from that urgent desire to call the race, because it does help contribute to that perception that things maybe are not above board. But I also can assure folks that they are, and the ballot tabulation process is extremely transparent. In Arizona, every tabulation room across the state is on video, and so anyone can go to a county elections website and watch that tabulation as it's happening. So we provide a lot of transparency, and I think it's also really important for voters to know that whether they turned in their ballot the day after they got it, or they dropped it off on election day because they wanted to be a part of election day, and that's like they're meaningful to them, that vote is counted.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about some of the legal challenges that are still sort of working their way through the courts. It seems like there are a number of issues. I don't want to get too much in the weeds for people, but it seems like there's concerns that fall into different categories. One is for the Navajo Nation, and this is obviously folks who, many that these are rural areas. Their argument is they should be able to have their ballots counted after election day because it takes so long for their ballots in a rural area to get from where they are to the main sorting place where they count the ballots. And then there are also questions too about the legality of somebody going, so the other bucket is somebody going and picking up absentee ballots from different voters and then combining them and turning them all in at one time. Can you talk to us about those things?
Sure. So the first thing you mentioned is the ballot receipt deadline. And there is a current lawsuit that challenges this deadline, which currently is 7 p.m. on election day. I think it's important to note that our office recently settled a very similar lawsuit dealing with the exact same issue. And in that settlement, put a lot of things into place that would help address some of the inequities. So increasing the number of early ballot drop boxes in these rural areas, remote areas, increasing the outreach we're doing to voters so that they understand those options, and increasing other early voting options that they have. So our focus really is on making sure that we are minimizing the amount of confusion for voters. And I think changing the deadline at this point in the game, where we've already been, doing outreach for this election, emphasizing that deadline would be problematic to say the least. There was a hearing in that case this morning, and so we're waiting to find out the outcome of that. Okay. The other lawsuit is pretty old. It's from 2016, and it's currently pending the Supreme Court. And so this is challenging the practice of so-called ballot harvesting. I hate using that word. It sounds like you're doing something nefarious like harvesting organs, but really it's helping your neighbors vote. And again, these areas where voting by mail, and there are lots of them in the state, is very, very challenging. This would help to, this law serves to disenfranchise large communities of voters. It is pending at the Supreme Court, and I don't anticipate any resolution on that prior to this election. As I mentioned, it's a pretty old lawsuit.
So what's the rule now about going and taking ballots, mail-in ballots from people who aren't directly related to you and going and dropping them off at a polling place or a drop box?
So that is currently a felony in Arizona. The Ninth Circuit overturned that, but there's a stay on that ruling. And so that current law, the felony ballot collection, is in effect, and we should anticipate that it will be in effect for this election.
And do you expect to see folks, especially campaign folks and attorneys, trying to raise this issue during the campaign? Do you expect to see that becoming a significant issue?
The issue of ballot collection?
Yes, that there'll be groups that are going to go and look for instances of this, or if they find instances of this, to alert. I assume they have to alert you. Is that how it works?
We normally encourage them to send those kind of complaints to their county election officials and at the county attorneys, but certainly they could also be filed with our office as well. But so we haven't seen, and that's one of the things about this law, we hadn't seen a lot of issues around this practice prior to the law being implemented. And since the law has been implemented, there hasn't been really any reports or instances of people doing this.
Right, of organized efforts to bring in a large number of ballots and drop them off at one time. As we end this today, I'm just curious for your thoughts. We talked about the disinformation that's being spread about voting, and we know a lot of people in your position are doing all they can to put accurate information out there. Some are doing it through Twitter or through YouTube. Can you talk about the ways in which your office is combating this disinformation and the kind of help that you still need to make sure that voters know what is real and what isn't as they go to vote?
Well, I think one of the most critical tools that we have is relationships directly with the various social media platforms, which really is the channel where a lot of this misinformation is spread so rapidly. And so we can, with those channels, we're able to report things and have it sort of acted on more quickly than just if a general public member was reporting it. And also maybe taken with a little more weight coming from our office versus somebody just in the public, because I'm sure that they have to deal with sort of misreports of misinformation all the time. But so that's a really important tool. And then we are also very active on social media, and we are also working with so our office, if you notice, our social media platforms are verified, and we're working with all of the different county and local election offices to get that same verification, because one of the things that the campaign that we're participating in with the National Association of Secretaries of State is Trusted Info 2020. And so those verified social media accounts or official websites are really the place we're trying to drive voters to get the accurate information. And if they see something that they're not sure, they can check it with those trusted sources of information. So those are all really important tools that we have. And as I mentioned earlier, I think we are being effective. We saw record turnout in our primary election, both early and overall. And so I think that we're doing something right.
Well, Secretary Hobbs, thank you so much for coming on and joining us. Good luck in this next sprint.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Happy to do it. And we now get to bring in a couple of people who can help us understand a little bit more about the political environment in Arizona. Steve Goldstein is a host at KJZZ in Phoenix, And Lisa Sanchez is a professor in the School of Government and Public Policy at the University of Arizona. Steve, Lisa, thanks so much for joining me. Man, earlier this year, my plan was to be there in person, to come down to the battleground state of Arizona. Of course, I would have liked to come there, say, in January or February.
Still way too hot, Amy, way too hot.
Yeah, I was going to say, rather than the middle of the summer or even September. But I am fascinated by this state. And Steve, I want to start with you. And to me, the most fascinating is to see how quickly this state has turned from reliably red to purple. So what's going on here? How did that happen?
Well, Amy, what's interesting, and I know Professor Sanchez has actually written about the changes in Maricopa County as well. That's the dramatic shift we saw, because for many years it was Pima County, which encompasses Tucson and some other areas as well, that was reliably left. In fact, a lot of the people who won statewide office in Arizona who were Democrats came from southern Arizona because of that support, like Senator Dennis DeConcini, for example. And it was often the Democrats from Maricopa County that didn't do so well. And so what we've seen is the demographic shift. I mean, certainly we've seen more activism when it comes to Latino voters. We've certainly seen that. We've also seen, though, people talk about Californians who have decided that maybe it's too expensive in California, or for whatever reason, maybe it's natural disaster, whatever it may be, they have come to Arizona as well and have moderated our politics. So we saw that. I heard you talk with Secretary Hobbs about 2018, and one of the races we were waiting for was the Sinema McSally race.
Right.
And that was one where Kyrsten Sinema did incredibly well in Maricopa County, which you never would have seen before from a Democratic U.S. Senate candidate. So again, a demographic shift, and also just we're seeing people who are even some moderate Republicans, a lot of independents are thinking K-12 education, that sort of funding. So we're seeing a moderation overall, I think.
Yeah, Lisa, talk to us about that, because I don't know if a lot of people appreciate that Maricopa County makes up more than 60% of the vote is coming from Phoenix and its surrounding suburbs. And I think for many of us, that for a long time, the image was of deserts and retirees. And right now, these are booming population centers, and especially they are behaving like so many other suburban areas, especially in the era of Trump, where they've moved from maybe being traditionally a little more conservative into the Democratic camp.
Definitely. So, you say that Maricopa County makes up a sizable portion of the votes in Arizona. Add that to Pima County, and you basically have most of the votes. I mean, right. Most of the polling data I see kind of breaks it up by what's Maricopa County doing, what's Pima County doing, and then rural other.
Everything else. Yeah.
Yeah. So everything else is sort of coupled together. And definitely we've seen sort of unprecedented population growth in Maricopa County. At one point, I think it was 2017, 2018, it was the fastest growing county in the entire nation. So when you see this type of change, really what you're looking for is, okay, where are the changes? Who's coming in and what do they believe? And so one of the things that has occurred, I mean, as Steve pointed out rightly, is you're getting some people from California, you're getting some more liberal sort of urbanites moving to Maricopa County. But I think where I would focus a lot of my attention as well is on the Latino population. It has been sizable for many years and growing, and now it's becoming more active, right? So we see, 32% of Arizona is Latino or Hispanic. So what the big question is, well, who are they going to vote for? And so some recent polling data has really suggested that there are, very much supporting Biden in this next election. And I think that's sort of a bellwether for other candidates who are sort of down ballot from the presidential race as well.
Well, Lisa, there's also a lot of talk that while the Latino vote, as the sleeping giant, that they make up a significant population, but sort of punch below their weight. I don't know if that's the right saying, but they don't turn out at the level that Anglo voters, African-American voters are turning out. And that if they turned out at their population level, at their voting age population level, that would be a total game changer. So are you seeing that there's some movement on that front in this election?
Absolutely. Actually, in the last several election cycles, so the midterms and then the 2016 election, we've seen sort of steady increases in voter turnout overall, in the state of Arizona, but we've also seen that in regard to Latino Hispanics in this area. And, I think just about every decade refers to, probably since about the 1980s, has referred to Latinos as the sleeping giant. So this is nothing new in terms of sort of politics, and referring to them in such a manner. But a lot of Latinos have suggested in polling data from Latino decisions that they're really enthusiastic to vote this time. Despite all these sort of concerns with the pandemic, Arizona Latinos want to vote, they want to register an opinion, and that opinion, according to polling, is decidedly Democratic this time.
Steve, let's talk about that because the president was down this week in Phoenix doing a roundtable with Latinos, and the expectation from the Trump campaign is that they can make serious inroads in this community. Is that realistic, do you think?
Amy, if people have short memories, I guess it is. I think if we contrast how then candidate Trump dealt with Latinos generally, I mean, obviously we know how he started the campaign using offensive terms like rapists, and he thinks there might be some good people, to paraphrase. And now he decides to go in a completely different way. Again, emphasizing one of the few strengths that a lot of people see the president having among voters is, does he have an economic appeal? Are there folks who like the idea of what he can do financially? And that's what he was appealing. He was having some small business owners come in and talk about this. And a couple of analysts that I read made an interesting point, which ended white voters on this, saying, hey, the last time I ran, I did not say nice things about Hispanics and Latinos, but this time, hey, look, we're all sort of getting along. So it almost feels like a recalculation, but to act as though people will be convinced by it, I would be surprised if too many. As Lisa pointed out, the numbers are still showing Joe Biden with huge advantage in Arizona, especially among Latinos.
Yeah, and Lisa, to that point, what we hear over and over again is that Latino voters are registering more and more, and this isn't just in Arizona, but nationally, as non-affiliated, that Democrats shouldn't think of them as a group of voters that's going to always be with them. Tell me what you're seeing in Arizona with their commitment to the Democratic Party. Is this about Democrats and their policies, or is this just where things are in this election?
I think it's a little of both. So where kind of the theory about Latinos being a little bit more moderate is really what's at stake here, at issue here, is that they tend to, when we ask them about their partisan affiliation, either, as you say, in high numbers, increasing numbers, put themselves in as independents. But there's still a really sizable portion that are traditional Democrats. Now, when you ask about ideology in polls of Latinos, they are more likely to say they're moderates, and many actually can say that they're conservatives. So they're not sort of partisan aligned in the same way that many other populations might be. African Americans coming to mind most easily, right? So they're tend to be liberal Democrats. So this is where this idea that they're in play comes from. Now, in play means that you have to be able to hit on the issues that they care about. And so Latinos in previous elections, have cared about immigration at some level, but that's a little bit of a misnomer that that's the only thing they care about. I think a lot of parties try and shoehorn Latinos into being these single issue immigration voters, but Latino issues are nothing more than American issues. They care about the economy. They care about healthcare. These things are not, not unique to Latinos. So if you're talking about the issues they care about in the way they care about, then that's where you're getting your vote, obviously. And currently, it seems like Democrats are aligning better with those issues.
Right. And to be clear, it's for Republicans, they don't need to win Latino voters to win the state. But obviously, the more voters that vote Republican, Latino voters that vote Republican, the harder it is for a Democrat to win the state. Steve, let's talk about another really high-profile statewide contest, and that's the Senate race. Martha McSally running again. She ran and lost in 2018. She was appointed to fill the seat of the late John McCain. Now she's in for another really tough race against Mark Kelly, the Democrat. What's going on here in that race, and how much is it tracking with what you're seeing at the presidential level?
What's fascinating to me, first of all, about this race is that after 2018, when Kyrsten Sinema defeated Martha McSally, then there was something that was never official, of course, but phrases we love, the Sinema playbook, because she had these incredible ads, ran a great campaign, and few of the ads actually mentioned she was a Democrat. We saw independent appealing to Arizona in that way. And Mark Kelly it's a different playbook because he was never a member of Congress, obviously, never run for office before, but it's the same sort of thing. I'm a problem solver. I'm pragmatic. I'm going to get things done. And by virtue of comparing to Martha McSally, is she tied to President Trump? Has she gotten anything done? She voted against your health care, that sort of thing. So that's really an interesting aspect of it. Every poll we've seen consistently has had Mark Kelly with a significant lead. The smallest I've seen was slightly outside the margin of error. We've seen as much as 12 and 13 points. I don't think anyone believes it's there, but people think he has a comfortable lead. Question I keep asking people is, can Mark Kelly win Arizona and Donald Trump win Arizona? Right. There are some who actually believe that's possible, that Donald Trump could eke out a victory and Mark Kelly could still win by 5 points. But one thing that has struck me about the parallels between Kelly and Biden is that independents, yes, but even some Republicans, these are two Democrats who, especially those who are disaffected by President Trump, they don't feel uncomfortable voting for these two. They may not jump for joy, but they see them as, okay, not ideologues and two people who might actually be able to get things done. And that seems like that's the parallel I think you're talking.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And to that, Lisa, I want to talk about the Republican Party in the state. I mean, this is a state of the late Senator John McCain, and the other Republican senator there was Jeff Flake, who retired instead of trying to run for re-election. They both obviously were not fans of Donald Trump, and Donald Trump is not fans of theirs. What does this say about the Republican Party in Arizona, that the two senators there, or former Republican senators there, were both unwilling to, and not, they were unwilling and then ultimately chose not to seek, for Jeff Flake's sake, seek re-election in a state that Donald Trump carried?
Yeah, so, I mean, I think it says actually nationally that there's something going on in the Republican Party writ large between elite Republicans and Republicans in the masses. So Republicans in the masses have been very, very receptive to kind of the off-the-cuff style of Donald Trump. In fact, they love it. They look for it because it shows sort of a very different way of being a politician and a very different style of a president that's sort of unapologetic. Now, those who are longtime elites in the Republican Party, you're starting to see them come out in large part against Donald Trump, and they don't really want to see this type of style and be associated with that. This is not sort of what the Republican Party that they came up with. So I think it talks a lot about kind of the schism at the elite level, maybe not so much at the mass level.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And to that, Steve, what do you think that anything changes should, let's say, Biden wins Arizona and Mark Kelly wins the Senate race, and Arizona now has two Democratic senators and a Democrat that won president? Does that give the Republican Party in Arizona pause to say, maybe we should kind of think about doing things differently, or have different kinds of candidates that we put forward the next election?
Amy, you've been covering politics so well for so long. I think about Mitt Romney after he lost in 2012. And the idea was, okay, what do we do to get the Latino vote? We need to calm these things down. And the Republicans kind of went the opposite way. Right. I think there are enough defiant, if we think about the primary voters and those who are precinct committee people of a Republican Party, so I will say this as a citizen, I suspect you're not going to go the QAnon direction, but to think that they're going to try to go more moderate, the Big Tent Republicans, for a lot of people, and Lisa pointed this out, it doesn't seem like it's really there anymore. I talked to Jeff Flake recently, and the things he was saying a couple of years ago, yes, now we're seeing more Republicans for Biden. We're seeing that, but they're being really shot down by many of those who are passionate about President Trump. The President Trump aspect of things is going to linger. There are going to be enough practical Republicans who say yes, but they may also just decide to register as independents and feel like they can't change the party around. I just based on the direction we've seen, I think it would need to be more than that. Again, you'd have to see, I come back to the pragmatism thing. If Mark Kelly were a flaming liberal, then maybe you'd see a change, but they're going to say, okay, he ran as an independent. He basically agrees with us on 30 to 50% of things, whether that's accurate or not. So I wouldn't bet on it, but I mean, I work in public radio, so I don't bet on much.
Listen, I think it's a very, very fair assessment. Lisa, I want to end here with you and talking about, the worries about election day. But of course, in Arizona, so many people vote early that the election is over the course of weeks, not just on one day. Are there concerns, and do you think there should be concerns about the ways in which disinformation is being spread about the way that people are voting early? The president obviously spreading a lot of this, that suggesting that somehow if you vote by mail, there is something potentially fraudulent that could happen. Do you worry that ultimately the state, if it goes for Joe Biden, that there is something of the trust that voters have in the voting process in the state will be questioned, and that people will, and the president himself may do this, but direct a lot of vitriol at the way that Arizona votes?
Well, I mean, I would say Arizona is probably not unique in this regard. I think a lot of people still assume that Arizona is very much a red state, and it is. I mean, if we're thinking about, registration levels, there are a sizable number of Republicans in the state. So certainly when you see a mismatch between kind of registration and sort of assumptions, long held assumptions, then, there's always a question mark. Why, right? So I think as the media kind of shines a light on Arizona as a battleground state, it's helpful to mitigate whichever way the election goes in Arizona, that maybe there was more electorally at stake here than we necessarily thought there was. Now, the other part of that question is kind of, will there be a response? Well, I mean, if history is any sort of indicator, in the last several presidential elections, there's always been recounts and talks of recounts. And there's been, I mean, in some cases, riots. And this is across the country. This is nationally. So I wouldn't expect this election to be any different. I mean, it's a very similar political, kind of divisive political environment. And therefore, anybody who doesn't see the outcome that they're hoping for is always going to kind of put a question mark on there. And then especially if you add in kind of the pandemic and all of kind of the uncertainty that we're living with these days, it's definitely going to cause a lot of people to feel uncomfortable about anything that may seem unique or untoward. And I haven't seen a lot in terms of PSAs about, voter information in the state of Arizona. Certainly, I use my students always as a bellwether. They're a unique population, but they are very media savvy. And kind of to a man, none of them have really seen a lot coming out of the state of Arizona suggesting, there's this big push to make sure that everything is done the way it should be, despite the uncertainty baked into this pie. So I think that there's room still for the state of Arizona to do a little more in terms of educating voters and telling them, look, we have been voting like this in large numbers via mail-in ballot and permanent early voting list for decades now, right? So things are going to be okay. We know the system. We understand how the system works. So I think if more of that kind of occurs, I think we should be able to eke out okay. But will there be people who don't like the outcome? Win or lose, I mean, regardless of who it is? Yeah, there always will be.
Well, Steve, that leaves you then as the PSA person, as part of the media. What role do you see yourself and others who do what you do in the state in helping to educate voters and to point out disinformation as much as you can.
Yeah, Amy, there's the fact check, the how many Pinocchios sort of thing. I mean, that is a responsibility to figure out what's going on, but a basic information. I want to go back to something you talked with Secretary Hobbs about, if I may. The idea of sort of the impatience of what election night really is. And in talking with county recorders and other people who are involved in these things, we have to send out the message, and this is not a partisan message, send out the message that accuracy is the most important thing, which sometimes people in media, you want to get things first, but in elections, and this is the biggest election of all time, as every election seems to be, but to a lot of people, this one certainly is. The concept is to say, listen, it's worth waiting 5 days. It's worth waiting however long it takes to get this right, because yes, as Lisa points out, people are going to be upset with the outcome, but it comes down to the media presenting the facts and letting people know what's out there, but also I love working election night. Sure. Do I want to know who won by 11 o'clock that night? I sure do. But if it doesn't happen, I also live in this democracy. And I think we just want things to come out accurate. And then when things are decided, they are decided.
Yeah. And Steve and Lisa, you really raise very good points. And the question of being disappointed in whoever wins the state is one thing that we're used to, but questioning the integrity of the voting process, that feels very new. To me, at least, but we will see. We've still got a ways to go before the election. Steve Goldstein, Lisa Sanchez, thank you both so much for joining me. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Amy.
Thanks.
Well, we love to bring these shows to our audience, but we know that they also don't happen easily. They cost some money. The Green Space and KJZZ are both nonprofit public media organizations that rely on support from listeners and from the viewers. So if you can, please donate. You can go online, and everyone here who's involved in making this happen will very much appreciate it. We also are coming back next week for our special election series. We'll be focusing on the state of Wisconsin. We're going to close out tonight with a special guest. Last week, we brought you a musician from North Carolina. Today, of course, is a homegrown musician from Arizona, a Tucson native, Najima Rainey, and her performance is going to start right now.
I'm Najima. Band is Just Najima from Tucson, Arizona. I would like to take this moment to recognize that this land on the border is stolen land, and the people who it belongs to still want it back. Ready? Everywhere I go, my Lord, everywhere I go, where somebody talking about Jesus, no room here for refugees, somebody talking about Jesus, can't share abundance, will charge a fee, somebody talking about Jesus, through my Lord and with the sea, somebody talking about Jesus, rap broke apart, lost my family, somebody talking about Jesus, alright, everywhere I go, my Lord, everywhere I go, where somebody talking about Jesus, everywhere I go, everywhere I
Somebody talking about Jesus. White man spit like I'm a dog in the street. Somebody talking about Jesus. Brown skin McDonald's, we bear well. Somebody talking about Jesus. This and Texas built the rich man's jail. Somebody talking about Jesus. Alright, everywhere I go, everywhere I go, my Lord, everywhere I go, well, somebody talking about Jesus. Everywhere I go, everywhere I go, my Lord, everywhere I go, well, somebody talking about Jesus. Last time, everywhere I go, everywhere I go, my Lord, everywhere I go, well, somebody talking about Jesus. Oh, wicked women, wicked men, wicked men. Oh, you gonna die someday. Oh, you gonna die someday. Oh, you gonna die someday. You gonna die someday. Oh, wicked people in a wicked world. Wicked world. Oh, you gotta pay your way. Oh, you gotta pay your way. Oh, you gotta pay your way. You gotta pay your way in this wicked world. This wicked world. World. Such a wicked world. Mama lost her head one piece at a time. Wicked world, cover up, hush, never mind. World. Such a wicked world. If the brother do right, it's still down and wrong. Wicked world, break them down, keep grinding on. World, what a wicked world. Father so exhausted, mothers can't win. Devil knocking, wicked world, come right in. World, what a wicked world. Said hello, wicked world. Hello, wicked world. Hello, wicked world. Hello, wicked world. Oh, 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 wicked world. Burn it down. Let's shut it down. Burn it down. Let's shut it down. Burn it down. Wicked world. Wicked world. Burn it down. Burn it down. Burn it down. Shut it down. That wicked world. That wicked world. Let's burn it down. Burn it down. Wicked world. Wicked world. Burn it down. Burn it down. Burn it down. Wicked world. Wicked world. Burn it down. Shut it down. Burn it down. Burn it down. Shut it down. Burn it down. Burn it down. Shut it down. Shut it down. It's a wicked world. It's a wicked world. It's a wicked world. Burn it down. 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 Oh, wicked world. Burn it down. Burn it down.
Well, a huge thanks to Just Najima for giving us that wonderful performance. And I also wanted to thank all of our guests, Secretary of State of Arizona, Katie Hobbs, KJZZ's Steve Goldstein, Professor Lisa Sanchez from the University of Arizona. I want to thank, of course, all the great folks at WNYC's Green Space who helped to put this together, as well as producers for Politics with Amy Walter, Patricia Jacob, and Amber Hall for helping to make all of this happen. Thank you to everyone here for joining us, for tuning in, and we hope to see you back here next week for Every Vote Counts. Our final state in the series is Wisconsin. So all you cheeseheads, please tune in. See you next time.